Hello there, my fellow students. I am Aldrich Del Arbahalia, and today, me and my fellow group members are conducting research about Franz Liszt. He is a former musician. What was he like back then? What were his greatest achievements? Well, today we answer it because our teacher asked it. Onwards to the video.
Life of Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was born on October 22, 1811 in Doberan, Kingdom of Hungary, Austrian Empire. Liszt gained renown in Europe during the early 19th century for his virtuoso skill as a pianist. He was a friend, musical promoter, and benefactor to many composers of his time, including Frederick Chopin, Charles Valentin Alcan, Richard Wagner, Hector Berlioz, Robert Schumann, Clara Schumann, Camille Saint-Saëns, Edvard Grieg, Ole Bull, Joachim Raff, Mikhail Glinka, and Alexander Borodin. A prolific composer, Liszt was one of the most prominent representatives of the New German School. Liszt's father played the piano, violin, cello, and guitar. He had been in the service of Prince Nikolaus II Esterházy and knew Haydn, Hummel, and Beethoven personally. At age 6, Franz began listening attentively to his father's piano playing. Adam began teaching him the piano at age 7, and Franz began composing in an elementary manner when he was 8. He appeared in concerts at Sopron and Pressburg in October and November 1820 at age 9. After the concerts, a group of wealthy sponsors offered to finance Franz's musical education in Vienna. There, Liszt received piano lessons from Carl Czerny, who in his own youth had been a student of Beethoven and Hummel. He also received lessons in composition from Ferdinando Payer and Antonio Salieri. Liszt's public debut in Vienna on December 1, 1822 at a concert at the Landständische Saal was a great success. He was greeted in Austrian and Hungarian aristocratic circles and met Beethoven and Schubert. Towards the end of 1823 or early 1824, Liszt's first composition was published, his variation on a waltz by Diabelli.
Music styles of Franz Liszt. Many of his piano compositions are among the most technically challenging in the repertoire. Liszt was himself a composer of lieder and choral music, of symphonic poems and other orchestral works. His compositions for organ are lauded and well established in the organ repertoire. Liszt's playing contains abandonment, a liberated feeling, but even when it becomes impetuous and energetic in his fortissimo, it is still without harshness and dryness. He draws from the piano tones that are purer, mellower, and stronger than anyone has been able to do. His touch has an indescribable charm. He is the enemy of affected, stilted, contorted expressions. Most of all, he wants truth in musical sentiment, and so he makes a psychological study of his emotions to convey them as they are. Thus, a strong expression is often followed by a sense of fatigue and dejection, a kind of coldness because this is the way nature works. Liszt was sometimes mocked in the press for facial expressions and gestures at the piano. Also noted were the extravagant liberties that he could take with the text of his score. Berlioz tells how Liszt would add cadenzas, tremolos, and trills when he played the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata and created a dramatic scene by changing the tempo between largo and presto.
Here are some of the most famous compositions of Franz Liszt.
Transcendental Etudes, numbers 1 to 12. The Transcendental Etudes are a set of 12 highly varied and technically demanding compositions that push contemporary pianos and pianists to the limit. They cover a wide range of moods and require mastery of a variety of virtuosic techniques. The third version of the Transcendental Etudes was published in 1852 and dedicated to pianist and composer Carl Czerny, Liszt's piano teacher, who was also a prolific composer of etudes. Hungarian Rhapsodies numbers 1 to 19. The Hungarian Rhapsodies are a set of 19 piano pieces based on Hungarian folk themes and noted for their difficulty. Liszt has also arranged versions for orchestra, piano duet, and piano trio. Liszt incorporated many themes he heard in his native Western Hungary, which he believed to be folk music, though many were in fact tunes written by members of the Hungarian upper middle class, often played by Roma or gypsy bands. Liszt has incorporated a number of effects unique to the sound of gypsy bands into the piano pieces, including the twanging of the cimbalom and syncopated rhythms. La lugubre gondola. The Lugubre Gondola, or the Black Gondola, is one of Liszt's best played pieces. This deeply introspective piece was first inspired by a premonition Liszt had of Wagner's death when in Venice in 1882, in response to the strike visions of funeral gondolas on the lagoons of Venice. Wagner, Liszt's revered son-in-law, was carried to his final resting place in just such a procession in February 1883, less than 2 months after Liszt composed the work. Mephisto Waltz Number 1. Mephisto Waltz Number 1 is the most popular of the 4 Mephisto waltzes composed by Liszt. The waltzes are named after the devil, Mephisto, in the German Faust legend. Liszt's virtuoso music style is brilliantly displayed in these pieces, which also reflect its fascination with the devil and program music. A Faust Symphony. A Faust Symphony in 3 character pictures was inspired by Goethe's drama Faust. Liszt does not attempt to tell the story of Faust but creates musical portraits of 3 main characters. He developed his musical technique of thematic transformation, in which a musical idea is developed by undergoing various changes. Hector Berlioz had just composed La Damnation de Faust, which he dedicated to Liszt, and Liszt returned the favor by dedicating his symphony to Berlioz.
The death of Franz Liszt.
Last years of Franz Liszt. In 1869, Liszt was invited to return to Weimar by the Grand Duke to give master classes in piano playing, and 2 years later, he was asked to do the same in Budapest. After a reconciliation with Wagner in 1872, Liszt regularly attended the Bayreuth festivals. He appeared occasionally as a pianist in charity concerts and continued to compose. In 1886, Liszt left Rome for the last time. He attended concerts of his works in Budapest, Liege, and Paris, and then went to London, his first visit there in 45 years, where several concerts of his works were given.
The quality of his music during his last years. His music deteriorated and began to lose some of its brilliant quality and became starker, more introverted, and more experimental in styles. His later works anticipate the harmonic style of Claude Debussy, and one late work called Bagatelle without tonality anticipates Bela Bartok and even Arnold Schoenberg.
He played for the last time at a concert in Luxembourg on July 19.
His health had not been good for some months, and he went to bed with a high fever, though he still managed to attend 2 Wagner performances. His illness developed into pneumonia. Cosima, who was then the director of the festival, left him to the care of a doctor as she managed the performances. He died on July 31, 1886.
Historical sources indicate that Liszt had progressive pyorrhea, cataracts in his left eye, and osteoarthritis. During his later years, his health further declined. In June 1881, he became fatigued and had generalized dropsy, edema, mainly in his legs.
Legacy. Although many people thought Liszt's works were flashy or superficial at the time, It is now widely accepted that many of Liszt's compositions, such as Nuagre Gris, Le Judeo, A la Villa d'Este, and others, which contain parallel fifths, the whole tone scale, parallel diminished and augmented triads, and unresolved dissonances, anticipated and influenced 20th century music by Debussy, Ravel, and Bela Bartok. Liszt's students. Early students. Liszt began teaching composing and piano instruction in 1827. On December 23, 1829, he wrote that his calendar was so packed with lessons that he barely had time to breathe from 8:30 in the morning until 10 at night. The majority of Liszt's students during this time period were amateurs, although there were a few who went on to have a professional career. Valerie Bossuet, Comtesse de Gasparin is an example of the former. Julius Eichberg, Per Wolf, and Hermann Cohen are examples of the latter. They were Liszt colleagues at the Conservatoire in Geneva during the winter of 1835 to 36. Wolf then traveled to St. Petersburg. During his tours, Liszt only gave a few lessons to pupils such as Johann Nepomuk Dunkel and Wilhelm von Lenz. In the spring of 1844, Liszt met Hans von Bülow, his future son-in-law, in Dresden.
Later students. After Liszt arrived in Weimar, the number of his pupils constantly climbed. By the time he died in 1886, there would have been several hundred persons who may be considered his students in some way. August Goldrich compiled a comprehensive collection of them. In a postscript, he stated that he had taken the term students in its broadest sense. As a result, his repertoire comprises pianists, violinists, cellists, harpists, organists, composers, conductors, vocalists, and even authors. In September 1881, Liszt authorized and amended a catalog by Ludwig Noll, Karl Beermann, Franz Pendel, Hans von Bronsart, Hans von Bülow, Julius Eichberg, Arthur Friedem, Karl Kleinworth, William Mason, Sophie Mentor, Karl Paulig, Dionys Bruckner, Julius Rubke, Edward Roos, Giovanni Gambatti, Karl Tausig, Vera Timanova, Joseph Wieniawski, Alexander Winterberger, and Julius Zarybski were among the 48 names. Among those missing from Noll's inventory were Chiaroli Agazzi and Agnes Street Kleinworth.
Liszt's teaching approach. Liszt gave little technical instruction to his students, trusting them to wash their filthy linen at home, as he put it. Instead, he concentrated on musical interpretation through narrative metaphor and wit. "Do not chop beefsteak for us," he told one student who blurred the rhythm in Liszt's Gnomon Ray. "There you go, mixing salad again." Liszt also wanted to avoid creating carbon copies of himself. Rather, he believed in preserving artistic individuality. Lessons were free of charge for Liszt. He was upset when German tabloids revealed details of pedagogue Theodor Kullak's bequest, indicating that Kullak had earned over 1,000,000 marks via teaching. As an artist, do you not get $1 million without making some sacrifice on the altar of art? Liszt told biographer Lina Raman. Karl Czerny, on the other hand, demanded an exorbitant amount for lessons and even fired Stephen Heller when he could not afford to pay for them. This spoke extremely high of his old instructor to whom he dedicated his transcendent efforts. He wrote to the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, encouraging Kullak's son to establish an endowment for deserving musicians, as Liszt had done on several occasions.
In today's presentation, I will be talking about the fun fact about Franz Liszt. Fact 1. He was born to be a star. Franz Liszt may have been destined for greatness from the start. Born in 1811 in the Austrian Empire, Liszt's father was an accomplished musician who worked for a Hungarian prince. Little Franz took over after him almost immediately, listening attentively to his father playing the piano when he was just 6, and started to compose music at the age of 8. It was only up from there. Fact 2. He was a prodigy. By the time he was 12 years old, Liszt had already become a music sensation in the opulent Austrian courts. He learned piano under Karl Czerny, who had himself learned from Beethoven, and even earned the patronage of some of the court's most powerful music lovers. Sadly, it all came crashing down in a matter of months. Fact 3. He suffered an early tragedy. In 1823, a series of tragic events started to plague the boy prodigy. First, Liszt's father lost his royal patronage, and 4 years later, the patriarch was dead. Suddenly, the teenage Liszt and his mother had to jump off the lap of luxury, move into a small apartment in Paris, and try to make ends meet. Fortunately, this is where Liszt picked up some very bad habits. Fact 4. He had a sinful addiction. This change in circumstances hit Liszt hard. He not only had to stop touring to score of adoring audience, he also had to sleep around teaching students in all parts of Paris, putting in grueling workdays from dawn until midnight. To cope, Liszt took up smoking and drinking, beginning his bad boy reputation at the tender age of 16. But he was just getting started. Fact 5. He fell in love with his student. Strapping and intelligent, it wasn't long before Liszt found himself head over heels for one of his students, the beautiful and gentle Caroline de Saint-Pric. They were doomed to a heartbreaking end. Caroline's father, a powerful political minister, was staunchly against the match and forced the young couple to split up. Liszt's response was nothing short of drastic.
Fact 6. He had a tragic love story. After his fairy tale turned into a tragedy, Liszt did what any heartsick young man would do. He nearly killed himself, plunged into utter despair. He became so sick that a Paris newspaper printed his obituary. During his dark time, he also considered becoming a religious devote, a strict path his own mother convinced him not to take. But when he rebounded from the angst, it was with a vengeance. Fact 7. He was an overachiever. After years of turmoil, Liszt finally turned his attention back to music and he went in hard. He decided he was going to be as good as virtuoso on the piano. Famed contemporary Niccolò Paganini was on the violin. Well, he succeeded alright. Fact 8. Audience had a strange reaction to him. Sometimes around late 1830s, a strange thing started happening to Liszt's audience. They were moved to absolute ecstasy. People even believed Liszt's effect was contagious, with fainting spells sweeping over Europe as he toured. Fact 9. Women fought over him. At first, crowd just admired Liszt's ability, but their respect soon turned revenues. Women would mob him and brawl over mere scraps from his handkerchief or gloves. All white legions of his fans wore his portraits on cameos as if he were their lover. Fact 10. His fans were terrifying. If you were a Liszt superfan, you went to even more extreme length than handkerchief and brooches. Some women pick up his coffee dregs, others turn his broken piano strings into bracelets, but the most disturbing fan of all went to the next level. She picked up a stub of his cigar, put it in a locket encrusted with diamonds, and wore it absolutely everywhere, unaware of sickly odor it gave forth.
Summary. Franz Liszt was a Hungarian composer and pianist. He was born in Duborian, or Rading, Kingdom of Hungary, Austrian Empire, on October 12, 1811, and died on July 31, 1886, in Beirut, Kingdom of Bavaria, German Empire. Liszt, pronounced as Liszt, was a major composer of the 19th century. He was the best pianist of his generation, and he went on several trips around Europe where audiences packed concert halls to hear him. He composed a lot of piano music. Many of his piano works were more difficult to play than anything else he had created. In this way, he advanced the technique of piano playing, establishing new benchmarks for the future. In his works, he frequently employed fresh concepts that sounded quite current at the time. He was highly helpful to other composers living at the period, assisting them in becoming more well-known by directing their works and performing some of their symphonic compositions on the piano. Early life. Liszt's father was an administrator for Prince Nicholas Esterhazy. The same royal family who employed composer Joseph Haydn, his father began teaching him the piano when he was 7 years old. He was a genius as a youngster, and within a year or two, he was performing in concerts. He was so promising that several wealthy Hungarians offered to pay for his musical instruction. His family relocated to Vienna in 1821. Czerny taught him piano, while Salieri taught him composition. Even though he was still a young lad, he quickly rose to prominence and met prominent artists such as Beethoven and Schubert. Beethoven is said to have kissed him on the cheek.
Carl Czerny was Liszt's piano teacher in Vienna. Carl Czerny, as some of you might know, was Beethoven's star pupil and a very well-known teacher. Czerny's initial impressions were that Liszt had talent, but that he had no knowledge of proper fingerings and that his playing style was very chaotic. Self-education. It was around this point where Liszt lamented his lack of education. He didn't have time for school, which he regretted. He dedicated himself to incessant reading and studying.
Liszt lived in Rome for 8 years. He composed a lot of sacred music and served as a priest in the Catholic Church. Cosima, his daughter, who had married the famed conductor Hans von Bülow, abandoned her husband and moved in with Wagner. They were parents of 2 children. For many years, Liszt and Wagner argued over this. Liszt spent the most of his final years traveling between 3 cities, Rome, Weimar, and Budapest. He referred to this as his 3/4 life. He died on July 31st, 1886, in Beirut. His personality. Liszt had a powerful personality that influenced everyone he encountered. He was a terrific showman when he played the piano at concerts. People created caricatures of him with his unruly mop of hair playing the piano. He was a courteous and understood how to get along with the nobility. He could be quite charitable, donating both money and time to other performers and bestowing accolades where it was due. He was a forceful, one-of-a-kind figure and one of the most prominent romantic composers of his day. He is widely renowned for his stunning virtuosic piano performances. Liszt's symphonic music is also significant. He composed symphonic poems, which are compositions that convey a tale or explain something. Les Preludes is the most well-known. In addition, he composed 2 piano concertos. He composed a great deal of church music. In those days, church music was frequently highly emotional, but Liszt strove to make his pieces assist people experience religious devotion.
Liszt's early compositions were written in the style of the Viennese school and were also influenced by Czerny's writing. However, his early works were not hits. It was during this teenage point in Liszt's life where he became disinterested with being a boy wonder and instead developed an interest in religion.
Conclusion. In many ways, Liszt typified the romantic artist. He was always on the lookout for spiritual significance in life. He walked with the heads of Saint Francis of Assisi, Gretchen, and Mephistopheles, all characters from Goethe, Faust. He was a 19th century musician, yet his ideas and music foreshadowed the 20th century. Thank you for listening.
Did you have fun watching the video? Well, have you learned anything else new about Franz Liszt? Well, that's it for today's video. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.